creating a wonderful riff of, Keith Richards and the Rolling Stones, particularly working with Peter Tosh. You can imagine them in a studio just sparking off of each other. Fantastic, actually. You can just, if you'd have been there, you'd have really got, a hell of a buzz out of that. But that's just spark, It isn't costing them a lot. It's just in their blood, it's in their DNA. There is little correlation between cost and time and economic value, okay? So, what am I left with? What am I left with? Good point. Income approaches. How long is something going to earn money? Now, you're in a funny sector because copyright extension in most legal jurisdictions lasts for a long time. Life of author, 70 years, that kind of stuff. But hey, computer gaming, for example, Electronic Arts are only going to make money for about 6 months. Hey, they need a lot of payback for all that cost to create, and they get it. The most stunning franchises in computer games known. But copyright period is very small. I was doing some film studio slates in California last year, 2 quite big film slates, and for 2 of the big studios, they make money in about 4 years. And that's it, gone. Yeah, there's a theatre, there's merchandising, there's video and that kind of thing, and online stuff. But after, a short period of time, you're going to that income stream's going to disappear. So, what do you do about that? Well, you just be sensible and you look at a period of lives. You look at life, which is all associated with putting income streams. It may be the computer game, it's only going to make income for 6 months, but it's going to be absolutely massive. It could be a film, which is going to have a 4-year cycle, or it could be something much longer than that. One of the jobs that I was quite well known for was valuing the Disney characters. Fascinating, the Disney characters. Now, there was big worry in the United States that those little guys, those characters, were going to run out of copyright. And you and I could have used them on our biscuits that we made at home and stuff like that. So what happens? In the US, they don't have, like we have in the UK, Norman castles and stuff like this. They're heritage of those Disney characters, okay? And wonderful things that they are too. But they were worried that that value of that huge portfolio was going to disappear because copyright was running out. So some copyright does last for a long time. It's what you see. You've just got to take case-by-case basis. So they went to Congress lobbying. What's going to happen if everybody can steal our copyright? As Walt Disney, just reminds me, mentioned earlier today in a session. And hey, surprise, surprise, strange but true. Congress voted to extend the copyright period. The power of a big corporation. But I'm pleased about it because those little guys are being looked after and continue to be looked after. But it's a very interesting valuation exercise, which effectively was asking me, what's the value if we extend the copyright period? And it was a powerful, powerful lobbying point. So it's the how much. So we go through sort of lies, but where do we get the input for these lives? Now, I've mentioned a few names early on, the Marley family, Ziggy and Damien and that lot, very powerful brand, that. Powerful brand. And what about, Heinz baked beans? I love baked beans, right? But I like Heinz baked beans. In the UK, and it's not too dissimilar to, there's a lot of copyright in that brand. So you've got Heinz baked beans, 10. I will pay 10 for a can of baked beans as long as I've got Heinz on it. It's trust to me, and I like the taste. But then there's something in the middle. We have these supermarkets in the UK, Tesco and Sainsbury's, chains of supermarkets. They make their own baked beans, okay? And you trust these supermarkets. Yeah, it's not a Heinz baked bean, but there's trust that there's not going to be horrible stuff in the can, it's not going to poison you, and it tastes okay. It's not quite Heinz, so I'll pay 6 or 7. Okay. And then you get something down here, the generic stuff. There's a chain of supermarkets. They're in all countries, these sort of supermarkets that you can go in there and you see sort of stuff that you've never heard, brands you've never heard of. It's sort of like Kel's biscuits and Demeter's coffee. This is not Blue Mountain, okay? But this is 2. There's a price difference. There's a profit margin difference. The power of, a significant copyright owner in music to actually, negotiate with film people or TV people and, broadcasters isn't the same as, somebody who's new and unknown, for example. So this power thing creates differences of perception on prices and value that I can measure by comparing them with a generic equivalent. If you can find a generic equivalent, you can find the differences which more powerful intellectual property, which more powerful copyright actually is paid for in the marketplace or licensed by people in the marketplace. So that gives me a sense of understanding of the value of more powerful copyright, a bigger name, a better name. As I say, look at the Elvis Presley estate and what they do when you infringe that copyright. They're down on you and they really, really make you hurt. But be that as it may, what's next? If there are any finance directors in this audience, you'd know what I was saying now. If I've got a business to run, I've got people, I've got their salaries to pay, I've got plant and machinery. Not too much of that nowadays in a lot of industry, particularly yours, but you'll have fantastic software and PCs in design and copyright. You will have perhaps a studio, which is expensive. That gear is expensive. There's a fixed asset environment in which you create your copyright, your design, your whatever it is. You know how much that costs. You know how much you need to earn just to keep it in operation, to stop it going into distress. So the receivers, the liquidation people, don't come in and say, you haven't paid your bill, so we're going to take all this recording stuff and we're going to sell it. You know how much profit you need to make to keep that fixed asset environment there with you earning money. However, you're a good business, and hopefully you'll be earning much more than that return that's required just to keep your fixed assets and your workforce in position. That super profit element is the value of your intellectual property, the value of your copyright. So that helps me understand the difference as well. Now, I sort of poo-pooed market a little bit earlier, but it has one good thing, the marketplace, a huge amount of data on licensing transactions, a huge amount. And then I ask the question, I pretend, who's coming to me to value their copyright or trademark, I say, let's pretend you don't own it. How much would you have to pay as a license fee to use my copyright? So therefore, I can work out the subject with and without the intellectual property, and we just pretend they don't own it, and you have to go out in the marketplace and license it in to use it, license in the software, license in the copyright. How much would you have to pay by reference to what goes on in the marketplace? So that's another kind of technique. So that's where we get to the how much, how long. We go through a series of lives, physical life, don't laugh, I value some bees. These bees are valuable, but in their environment where they are working, they don't last too long. Functional, technological, economic and legal. Remember the legal bit. You may have copyright for a long period of time, but the issue is you may not really need copyright protection for a long period of time because you're making your money in, let's say, like the computer games in 6 months, and then you're on to something else. At what risk? When we've calculated all these figures going forward, obviously a new drug which hasn't gone through clinical stage 1, let's say, is far riskier than some mature copyright which is going on and on. So there's more risk if I'm valuing a drug in an early stage than some mature music or whatever copyright or a customer intangible copyright. Yeah, we have mathematical models that sort of help us. We'll just run through these because I'm running out of time. But why we use computers on economic modeling, if you just change, 4 scenarios 4 times, that's 256 models. So that's why we have sort of computers to help us do the mathematics of it all. But it doesn't matter. You get your assumptions right. You work with the industry experts. You work with the accountants and lawyers. You'll get that right. This is where I've got to finish. This is this slide I had up earlier on, and this is the most important part of all. Right, I do my valuation, and then I think, right, why am I doing this valuation? Who am I doing it for? What situation do I have to assist somebody negotiate? So say I'm here, I'm valuing some copyright trademark brand of an owner up here, and you, the audience, desperately want this asset. Do you know what I think I want to do? I want to find out what sort of people you are, what sort of risk takers you are. Are you like those pension trustees or bankers that take zero risk? Or are you the sort of gambler? You know, you're putting something on the 4 o'clock at some local race course. What type of people are you is very important to understand. Now, it gets even better than this. If I am clever and if I can do a little bit of due diligence, I could get a private investigator on you and see how you tick. But also, you know, it's the boys and girls thing. If I'm sort of negotiating with Jill, my wife, about a holiday or something like that, I'll have a drink with the boys and I'll say, I've got to talk about a holiday with Jill. I want to go to Norway. She wants to come to Kingston, Jamaica. How do I get her on my side? After a few pints of Guinness, my drink, I am really confident because my boys, my pals have given me all the information that I'm going to win this argument. So I walk into the room and I say, back this holiday. I'm very confident here. And, you know, within a few seconds, I get this curveball that hits me in the head. None of us have thought where she comes from. But I should have spoken to her friends because boys and girls are very different. And sometimes, you know, I've indicated earlier, I've got, you know, 3 girls, and you know, if I'm out to dinner and something, sometimes I think I'm better off talking to Charlie, my cat, because they're on a different wavelength, a different planet to me entirely. But you've got to, the point is, try and work it out though, because if you can work out who you're dealing with, play them, give them what they want. So it's more likely that you will win the value proposition, and that's the most important thing I can leave with you. Who you're doing it for, what kind of people is really important. So thank you.
All right, whose head is spinning now? That was a very interesting presentation, and I think it really highlighted some of the issues that going into valuing intellectual property. And really, I do take away that takeaway. Value depends on who you're doing it for. All right, our next presentation is from Mrs. Valerie Crawford from EXIM, and I think she's going to bring it down to our local environment quite a little bit. Let's welcome her.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bell. I must just say that I am so pleased to be representing EXIM Bank here this afternoon at this very timely conference. Kelvin just did a really enlightening presentation, Mr. King. And however, I'm afraid I'm going to bring you down to our local environment, just because I'm going to be speaking about, giving you a little overview of what happens here, speaking about our local industry, the financing options available in the local environment, and maybe some EXIM's experience and some recommendations for the way forward. We speak about the creative industries as this vehicle of growth. However, historically, we have really underutilized this vehicle. Our national industrial policy, our national export strategy, speaks to this industry as one of paramount importance. However, Mr. King, you will see as I go along that growth in the creative industries in Jamaica is challenged by so many different things. Access to capital, the financial sector's limited experience with the industry, the lack of data, the previous panel spoke to that, the lack of data, the informality of most of the members of the creative industry, the informal structure that we have around it, and of course the creative industries, the members or the players in the creative industries, their inability to provide traditional modes of collateral, hence the importance of this seminar today, speaking about intellectual property and how to monetize it. We recognize that intellectual property, IP, is a possible solution to the collateral challenge which members in the industry face. And of course, my learned colleague here, my learned panelist, Mr. King, spoke to so many ways in which one values IP and that it is used so much actively in developed markets. Main categories, we all know copyrights, patents, trademarks. However, for the bank, I'm speaking from the EXIM bank's perspective, and I'm so sorry there are not many other bankers in the audience this evening. But the EXIM bank has a particular role to play as one of the development banks of Jamaica. So we have to push this and hope that we will be the trailblazers and that others, the commercial bankers and others, will follow us in this very important exercise of understanding, appreciating how important the value of IP is to the development of this industry. We need our support, of course, through JIPO, because without the registration of IP through WIPO, JIPO, the verification of ownership, ensuring that the rights are not pledged elsewhere, we're not going anywhere because we need to maintain our IP rights. Valuation of IP is essential for, as we spoke here, the valuation of IP is essential not only as a legal asset, but as a financial instrument. Monetizing IP assets to increase shareholder value, seeking equity, allocating acquisitions. One of our speakers this morning, Jesse Royal, he was speaking about the mix that comes together in a composition when he's speaking about music. He said the lyrics, the arrangements, the production, all of this comes together when we're looking at valuing IP. Avoiding asset impairments, we speak about values, as Mr. King spoke to it. Maximizing royalties. And today, when Mr. Ganches used lively up yourself, I wondered if Carl wasn't taking note of it, whether or not he had to pay some money to the Marley family as he used that little snippet from Bob Marley's song. Enhancing business relationships, alignment to international standards, and as we mentioned before, the brand, developing international linkages for expansion, e.g., leading brand companies, working with them, Nike, Puma, Usain Bolt is one such example, and of course with sports and the diaspora, New York, London, and so on. Also, the value of IP, this is where we come in. It provides an expanded category of assets for the bankers to use as collateral. It enhances business. It allows improved access to credit for MSMEs, growth in the creative industries, increased foreign exchange earnings, which was spoken about before, and of course, increased employment. The local industry, and somebody said today that everybody spoke about the musicians. Well, we know visual and performing arts, musicians, singers, artists, designers, film producers, animators, publishing, playwrights, authors, composers, all in the audience here, I'm sure, sports, invention, researchers, our developers of our herbs and spices, the latest one, of course, Canasol, Asmasol, the big talk about our brand in that special herb. Software development, technology. All of this comes there. But it is true. It is true. We should have branded it a long time ago. Financing options available currently in the local, for the local industry. This is a reality. And this is why we're here. This is a reality, and we want to go forward. We want to understand how to value. And we need experts like, this is why we have experts like Mr. King here with us this evening. And of course, Christy is going to speak to it too as well. The current financing options available for us: equity, private owner equity, venture capital, not a very developed one anyway. DBJ is trying to work with us to see how they can push forward the creative industries and provide financing. We are hoping that that will come on stream by mid-year this year. The junior stock exchange, right? But of course you have to be at least 2 to 3 years in existence. You have to be solid financially for the junior stock exchange to really take you on. Grant funding, we do have a bit of that through CEDA, through the DBJ, and quasi-equity. Debt financing, of course, is the most popular one with the commercial banks. Development Bank of Jamaica. But however, few, it is the truth, few recognize the value of IP and bank the creators on the basis of their IP. In fact, I looked at the BOJ economic statistics on commercial banks, and the loan stock to the creative industries as at November 13 was only 0.6% to the creative industries. So everything else was manufacturing, agriculture, everything else but the creative industry. And this is simply because we are still using traditional modes of collateral, and we are pretty risk averse. Not we, well, Mrs. Bell is telling me not we, not EXIM Bank. Okay, we know that there's the active use of IP in international markets, and some recommendations came to the fore based on looking at some of the best practices in other jurisdictions. Increased government focus on assisting SMEs in development of the assets. And here I speak about grants, guarantees, subsidies. And, well, I don't know how many, if members of the Ministry of Culture or Industry, if they're still here. But when I had the privilege of attending the WIPO conference in Singapore 3 years ago, thanks to Carol and Lisa. And I was surprised that most of the Asian countries that presented there, they were solidly backed by their governments, grant funding, special concessions, because they're based mainly in technology, and they put their money behind their creators and the creative industries. Not so here. And I think Dr. James spoke to it, Venus James, and he's correct, that they have developed on their own, and then we take the credit. Greater facilitation of angel and venture capital networks. Development of special purpose vehicles, I think Mr. King spoke to securitization. And increased awareness of best practices in the protection of IP. WIPO, JIPO to develop training courses and case studies, because I think outside of these big conferences, we need to have these things more regularly so that both the financial services sector and all the sectors involved will come together to push this industry forward. And of course, the consideration of tax incentives for the film industry in particular. Let me now go to EXIM Bank's experience and our response. Okay, EXIM Bank has been challenged, right, not to lend. We had to lend not solely on IP at all. We have given limited support to the creative industries, but we are very proud of what we have done. We facilitated some artists, and there we used intellectual property. We were able to value their span of artworks. We were able to catalog it. And so this was the first learning experience for us, where we mortgaged their property rights. We mortgaged it, and I was learning. I thought we would have only mortgaged those that they presented to us for security. But in mortgaging it, I understand that we did it for past, present, and future. So for those artists that we facilitated, it's past, present, and future until I would imagine they have paid back the debt. But we're pleased to know that we were able to help a group of people for training, capacity building. That was the only experience we had, really using their intellectual property, valuing it, but still discounting it. If the value was X, we discounted it by 50%. Because as Mr. King said, to support him, we look at the worst case scenario. In the event of a loss, will we recover? We have facilitated publishing, and in fact, I'm so proud of the one that we did, because the book, she was a new writer, new author, but I must confess that we took her real property as security. Although we had, it's true, we did, even although we had all the cash flows, who the publisher was, I mean, how many books were to be sold. In fact, I think the book is right over there. Could you pass a woman? I brought it with me. And she acknowledged, she was so nice, she acknowledged EXIM. See there, woman. Just read it for me. This is Jamaican woman on the road to Parliament. Nobody had documented the work and the number of women who helped to build this government, who sat in Parliament. So she did this book, and it was a resounding success. and the debt was paid back forthwith. But unfortunately, I didn't have the courage to take her IP. I took her home and subsequently released it. And we're proud of our foreign animation. Now, as I think it was the first speaker this morning, he said that creation is a startup, and most bankers want companies, you have to be in business for at least 2 or 3 years. We shy away from startups. But I'm so glad that we took this bold step and we assisted these 2 animation companies start up. We walked with them, partial IP, partial hard security, partial working with DBJ through a special grant funding arrangement, and partially the confidence of unsecured lending through the EXIM Bank. And these 2 animation companies, I know they're already revolutionizing the creative industries. Their capacity for employment, the capacity for foreign exchange earnings, just tremendous. So we're really proud of our work. We're starting, and this is why we had to co-sponsor a seminar such as this to speak about what we're trying to do and to better understand how to value IP and how to really work with our talent. Okay, we understand that some responses, it will differ based on the creative sector and based on the persons involved. Some of the considerations: reliable cash flow projections, reuse revenue streams, the probability of the project's commercial success, the performance capability under the contract, the track record of the client, and risk mitigation factors. And here I speak about the track record, and I just want to mention that when you think of, everybody's speaking about Bob Marley, but and Reggae Sunsplash and reggae, this great brand and this great music. And I can recall, because I was there, in the late 70s, when Reggae Sunsplash started, nobody would stand behind it. And I'm so proud that I'm associated with the bank then and this one now, that the bank I was with then decided to finance them. We used hard security. But do you know that Robert Nesta Marley performed at Jarrett Park? And I watched him there that night. He performed to an almost empty Jarrett Park. You could have danced through the chairs, you could have walked up and down, because the Jamaican government and the people did not put the money behind this tremendously talented person. The following year, they had to move from Jarrett Park because there was a spillover. It was so big, Bob, the second year. And so I'm saying that it is a growth, and I'm so happy that today, they had to move from Jarrett Park to the Seawind Peninsula. The Seawind Peninsula couldn't hold when Bob sang there. And so Reggae Sunsplash, it's no Reggae Sumfest and Reggae Japan, but it had to start somewhere. So I'm so pleased everybody's speaking about Bob, but it started somewhere. Nobody wanted to deal with this knotted dreadlocks guy who was singing revolutionary music, but that's how it is. That's how it is. That's how it is. It took a visionary like Chris Blackwell out of England to okay, the way forward. Just some suggestions for the local industry. Increase public awareness and increase public education on IP management. Regular management, IP management gap audits. And here we will lean heavily on JIPO. Enhance credit information via an IP registry. We speak about a securities registry, but the EXIM Bank is proposed that we take it further, that although we have the securities registry, to differentiate an IP registry to signify the importance of registering IP. So it's easily identifiable. So if we're taking security, it's easy to know who has a prior lien or a prior charge if there has been a lien. But to disaggregate IP, to make it stand out and to really give importance to put our money behind our mouth. to utilize valuation methodologies in keeping with international standards, international best practices, and here we would have to rely on experts like Mr. King, Chris Fagan, PriceWaterhouseCoopers, and such. Continued liaison with JIPO towards increased awareness and formulation of policy recommendations, and continued partnership with DBJ CREF. And we feel that if we have all these parties coming together, support from our international partners, because until we understand how to value IP and how to handle it, the bankers will not step forward in confidence to really support the creative industries the way that they deserve to be supported, as they are touted so heavily by all governments as this vehicle of growth. So we need to put our money where our mouth is. The last slide. Take from it, Mrs. Bell. Okay, 2 questions now before I end. How do the regulators, BOJ, FSC, view treat with IP? And here we're speaking about our central bank, the Bank of Jamaica. The reluctance of bankers to really push hard for IP. They're worried about the bad debt at the end of the year and the provisioning which hits the bottom line in loan losses. The fact of the matter is that there's something called IFRS. And unless, Chris will speak to it, and unless there's some kind of cash flow and some hard security that they can value or some methodology for valuing, believe you me, we have no choice. We have to provide for a bad debt. So unless the regulators really come on board, that's the Bank of Jamaica, the Financial Services Corporation, for those of you who, just to deal with the acronym, we won't get too far. And of course, a big question, does legislation really allow for the use of IP as collateral? And my 2 learned friends will speak to the questions. And I'm just going to leave you with just one final thought and comment. And maybe in the question and answer, I'll ask Mr. King to speak to it. There is universality of international property rights, ownership, and the laws and protection measures. But these must all be appropriately used and updated to support the financing, protection, and development of Jamaica's unique and distinctive intellectual and heritage. And here I speak to language, true identity, our property. I don't know whether that is something which one has to look at, if cultures vary across borders, and whether or not different laws have to be updated and looked at, because we are truly unique as a Caribbean people, and here I'm speaking for Jamaica. So on this note, I just want to thank you for listening, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerie. Valerie, what is that with the cannasol? I know, no, I'm just teasing you. No, but we do understand that there may be some opportunities there based on our brand. Chris is going to come next. I think his presentation is going to be a little technical, but I ask you to just pay keen attention, particularly those in the audience who are grappling with how do I actually assign value.
Good afternoon, everyone. It was just last Tuesday I was asked to do this presentation, and even though the time was short, I believe as a firm, we believe that this sector, the creative industry, is very critical. It's a strategic asset for the country. And when you look at our economy and I'm sorry. Bring it up. Oh, here. Sorry, am I better? Can you hear me now? Much clearer? Yeah. Can you hear me now? Sorry about that. Yeah, as I was saying, when you look at our economy and the challenges that the manufacturing sector faces, you know, the high energy costs, the oil costs, and you look at the creative industries, you realize that there's really an area that is unexploited. You know, these are people that, in some instances, earn foreign exchange, and it gets out rather than just looking at our economy, which is just concentrated on the domestic scene. Now, in terms of what I'll be doing, where's this thing here? I'll try to make a complex matter very simple. I hope to do that in a quite short order. So I'll be looking at just 3 areas where, one, just to give you a sense of the marketplace of who provides financing for IP, basically on an international basis. Just to look at, as well, give you some examples of some of the intellectual property assets that have been financed. Then I will take you through some of the most commonly used methods that are used to finance these intellectual property assets, and then to show you how a financial advisor can assist you in protecting the value of those assets and even monetizing them. Sorry, you won't be able to see this slide, but I had to just borrow it from the International Asset Management publication. But if I just walk you through quickly, pretty much what it does is, and the key takeaways from this are, one, there are about 5 different sources that provide financing for IPs. And if we're starting from the bottom, which is the public equity, and meaning that in terms of the level of funding that is being offered to owners of these intellectual properties, we'd start from the private equity investors. These are high net worth individuals. Typical size of transaction ranging 2 million to 20 million US dollars. And then we move up to the hedge funds, and we go to what we call the second lien loans, which are subordinated. These are providers of loans that will take a second charge on an asset. Then we go to the typical bank loans, and then we call the asset-based securitization. Now, the asset-based securitizations is really, when you look at all the statistics, that's the biggest market. These are where they pool several assets together and offer bigger type lending. And you're talking about over 20 million and up to $1 billion in financing on any one transaction. What you find also is that a number of these players that provide these types of solution, they span across the different types. So you might find a pension fund that they will go into the asset-based securitization. They might go into the second lien financing. And you have some of the private equity investors who not only would invest directly into those assets, but also would form part of hedge funds as well. But in all things, what you find happening that some of these, it takes time. So if we're looking at like a private equity, someone who wants to get direct involvement in a company that owns these assets, they will spend a lot of time getting to understand the business. They will do their due diligence. So the time to close that deal is a bit longer than, say, for example, a second lien loan or provider who is just interested to know that they can place a charge on the asset. Similar to the asset-based securities, too, those transactions tend to take a while longer too because of the complexity in structuring those sort of deals. Just to give you a few examples. Now, traditionally, it used to be the pharmaceutical patents that would be securitized, right? You know, those monies would come in. Some of it is really to get cash upfront to fund the existing development of the very same asset that they are developing, or even to develop further new assets. Then we have the music and the film entertainment royalties. So from the third-party distribution, those royalties that come in are typically used in securitization deals as well. In the case of like the film industry, one effective way that people use these transactions or these financing mechanisms is to really get the cash up front to offset against their production costs. And of lately, we see the royalties and the franchises coming in. So just to put it in context, when you look at, like, for example, I got a couple of key deals. And when you look at, like, the pharmaceutical patents, you know, back in 2003, Royalty Pharma, they raised $600 million, and that was through a revolving loan structure with what they call a, and I will take you through when we want to start going through these structures. It had an insurance wrap which enhanced the credibility of the asset. In terms of the music, interestingly, you will see that I have $30 million that was raised through a securitization for the James Brown's catalog, and that's 750 songs. But also interestingly, one of the first securitization, and that was in the music industry, was what we call the Bowie bonds. And that was in 1997 when 25 albums were packaged together and secured to raise $55 million. We're going to the brands, and everybody knowing about brands. When you look at, for example, Guess, they raised $75 million by just securitizing the royalties that they earn on the trademarks. And in 2006, franchise fee, when that franchise, which includes not only the Dunkin' Donuts, but the Baskin Robbins brands, when that was being bought out by a group of private equity investors, they actually used the royalties from the franchise fees to secure or to refinance a leveraged buyout. And we're looking at 1.7 billion. So, in other words, what I'm saying that even though some of these things may be invisible or you cannot physically place a tangible hold on these, there is value, and the marketplace can recognize it. I'll just quickly take you through some of the methods. The three commonly used methods that we see in the marketplace are: one, the royalty interest purchases method, the revenue interest financing method, and lastly, the securitization. Just to quickly take you through the royalty interest purchases method. This method, see if I can break it down very quickly for you, involves three parties. We have the owner, the person who owns the asset. We have the licensee, that's the person who has the right to use those assets, and in return we pay a franchise or some royalty. And you have the investor. Now what happened is that the investor participates in a portion of the royalty. And what is done is that the royalties that is paid by the licensee, that goes into what we call a holding account. So here we have investors that have pooled the money and have paid a lump sum to the IP owner, lump sum in terms of a present value today of future earnings, future royalty or future franchise, whatever that asset is. The owner still owns this asset, but what happens is that the future income that is attributable from those assets, won't go to the owner. It will now go to the investors who have paid upfront for those future income. this holding account is really just a special purpose vehicle entity that accounts for the payments and then distribute it to the respective investors. The advantage of this method is that, especially for an asset where there's uncertainty in terms of value, and this asset could be a blockbuster asset, particularly like, for example, the biotech, where you have a new drug, you don't really know how effective it will be or what the potential value. One beauty about this is that you can have what we call a dollar cap. So even though you have signed agreements that say now you earn $10 per every volume, every box you sell or whatever, you believe that it can earn $20. You can actually have a cap. So only $10 will come to the lockbox account, the holding company, this SPV, and that $10 will be distributed to the respective investors based on their interest. But in the future, if it goes up to the $20, that difference goes to the owner of the asset. Another interesting feature of this method also is that you can actually define the geographic boundary. So if you're entering into different marketplaces, you could actually specify which areas, which revenue streams that you want to channel or to fund, as well as a time period. So it could be for only a certain period. Another method is the revenue interest. Now, this method is a bit different from the royalty interest method, where in this case it's more of a loan. So rather than let me put that another way. A loan will be provided to the owner of this asset, and it's the income that comes in from the licensee, whatever royalty they pay, will be used to finance a debt that is provided by the institution. In this case, it's usually that the asset that is used as an underlying collateral. All right, and the last method, I hope I'm not making it too simple for you folks. But so the last method is a securitization. And I think this is the buzzword for everybody, where what it really is, securitization, if you think about it, is really you are pooling a group of homogeneous products into one asset and using that to create a financial instrument. So in other words, you have different assets. If you are a musician, you may have different albums. You could create a catalog. You could pool all of those assets as one asset and then use that to create an instrument that you can now leverage to raise funds. Right? Now, similarly, how that works is that an upfront payment would be paid to the owner of the asset, and the rights, that the licensing rights of that asset is really transferred to a SPV. So the owner doesn't own the cash flows that will be coming from this asset anymore. It will be going now to a special purpose vehicle. And that the royalty fees and any future income that is earned from those assets will be used to finance the debt that has been raised for those assets. As simple as it sounds, it's a bit complex in that if you think about it, because one will be financing this specific asset and there's no real brick and mortar, then you have to spend significant time in doing due diligence to understand the characteristics, in particular the quality of the earnings. So when you think about what can impact on how these cash flows may be earned. For example, it could be a musician. I mean, the age of the person, their track record, do they have any previous catalogs or any other precedents that you can use? Then it begs the question to understand the level of research you have to do to make sure they are comfortable with it. There are ways to get around it, though, in the sense that, and people do all kind of things. So you will hear terms like insurance wrap, where a special purpose insurance company will undertake for premium to provide an insurance should in case certain conditions happen, then it kicks in to enhance the payments of those, or in meeting those liabilities. Sorry. And there's also what we call over-collateralization. So for example, what you might find happening too is that rather than just putting one specific asset in that pool, so if we think about like the biotech industry, rather than just putting in one patent in, you could probably put in a pool so that it diversifies that income flow. You also have what we call a holdback or reserve account. And what a holdback or reserve account does is really an account that says, out of the future payments that will be made, not all of it will be distributed immediately. Some will be retained as almost like an internal insurance to say, if something happens to the lenders, then there's this reserve that can make good their payments. Yeah, man. So just generally, in terms of who finances, if you notice, this is just the pecking order in terms of who gets payment first. So looking at the risk of realizing your cash flow, from least to the most, you have the equity. These are the ordinary shareholders that these guys don't get. If there's a default, they are the ones mostly at risk. And then ranking in terms of seniority or charge against the assets will be going up, where you start with the mezzanine notes, the senior, and then the super seniors. These super seniors are just people who have a first charge over your senior lenders, right? I won't spend much time here, but pretty much I'm just recapping the advantages. So just to recap a bit, that in terms of flexibility, the royalty interest purchase method provides flexibility in terms of you can actually specify time period, geographic area, right? As well as you can also put in several assets to diversify the revenue flow. Sorry. In terms of the royalty interest method, again, the feature with the dollar cap method, it's a feature that it actually incentivizes the person who owns it that if this asset should realize more than what we are saying, then there's upside for them still. The main disadvantage is that in the case of the royalty interest method is that you are giving up this steady stream of income for an upfront. So if something should happen, then there's no future income that you're going to be earning from this. In addition to that, then, for example, in the revenue interest financing method, is that because the asset still retains, because the owner still retains an interest in the assets, then if that asset underperforms, it also impacts their credit worthiness and their credit rating. Whereas the securitization and the royalty interest method, because they have no disperse of their interests, or separate their interests, it doesn't necessarily, the underperformance of that asset doesn't necessarily affect their creditability. The advantages to the investors, in most cases it offers an alternate form of investment than your traditional government papers or your equities. And also it provides for people who are focusing on just certain sectors and understand those sectors, it allows them a basis to just focus on their interests. Key disadvantage for the investor is that in the case that you have now owned this asset, then that pretty much that because you now own this asset, then you now faces a risk of the performance of that asset. If it fails, then that's it. Just to wrap up briefly is when you're looking at the protection of the asset, some of the risk factors that we have to recognize is that when you look at like the customer preferences, even though you have this intellectual property, this know-how, the market changes, demand changes, right? For example, when looking at the technology, there's also technological obsolescence, right? If you look at, for example, with Kodak, the situation with Kodak now that is trying to sell their IP portfolio, that whole film capturing or imaging market that has just now changed with the whole advent of digitization. Changes in the regulatory law as well. For the folks operating under the biotech, you're spending 20-odd years investing in developing a drug, and the FDA wants to shorten the period. The threat of generic drugs coming in and affecting your recoverability of your investment, that's a risk. And then there's the infringement risk, where people can just copy your thing and you don't get the benefit of any compensation from use of those assets. And the last risk as well is the unenforceability. So for example, just a bad contract being written, you won't be able to exercise that ability to recover your any assets that is due to you or any funds that is due to you. All right. And finally, just to quickly walk you through the IP life cycle. We have 5 stages: analyze, strategize, build, defend, and monetize. And it is very important that in each of those sections, an advisor can help you. So if you're looking in the analyze section, is somebody who can go through your portfolio and see if there are any underutilized assets. Are there assets that you're not earning any money on? And you strategize. What is your corporate strategy? How do you get your intellectual properties to align with those strategies? Do you need to acquire additional ones to enhance the ones you have? In the bill, we're doing the quantitatives now. What sort of valuations we're looking at? How do we help you with negotiating contracts to get income from these assets? And the defending is, once you go there in the market, then how do you now avoid anybody from infringing on your assets? Right? And finally is where we have the monetization, where now that you have this asset, how now can I realize some monies from this? All right, and that's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Chris. We're running a little bit behind, so I'm going to ask Dan to keep it tight so we can get in a few questions. I know you've been, some people are glossing over. And I know a lot of the terms are technical, and I'm sure that we're going to make the presentations available to you so you can walk through them a little bit more, which I think would be useful, and certainly the panel is going to be made available so you can ask questions. Dianne?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I think the moderator will quickly learn. Never make the lawyer this final speaker. Never. When we say we are wrapping up, we may not be brief. So if my presentation could come up quickly. Well, my presentation really speaks to creators with side notes to policymakers, I had a strong suspicion that we wouldn't have many of them here, and we would have a good showing of the creator group. And so I'm speaking to creators mainly and hoping that the policymakers will take note. In recent times, of course, IP assets have skyrocketed in value and relevance. IP audits, things are running ahead of me, like automatically. Can we stop it? It's just going. Right. IP audits, valuations, securitizations, monetization, these are becoming entrenched practices of forward-looking companies. Just a couple, this is going 5 minutes. Okay. Okay. No, anyway, I have just focused on a couple examples. Since Apple, Microsoft, RIM, Ericsson, and others succeeded in a bid in 2011 for Nortel's portfolio of 3,000 patents, which valued $5 billion US, investors' interest in IP portfolios have peaked. InterDigital raised $375 million in the sale of a patent portfolio to Intel in 2012, and Intel's share price consequently jumped. In January 2012, a UK finance company, ICG, sold its stake in CPA Global, which is the world's top IP management specialist, in a deal which valued IP management at £950 million. Am I back now? Okay, sorry. The visual is important for this because what I'm trying to illustrate is that although I've given those examples which relate mainly to the pharmaceutical and technology patents, creative industries are also tapping into the value of IP. Can I go? Right, okay. So Jamaican creative industries possess the potential, obviously, which is why we're having this discussion, to move beyond revenue from the primary products to licensing, franchising, and merchandising. And this can only be realized through strategic leverage of IPRs. I like to give this portrait as an example of possible value of intellectual property just from a painting. And I don't know if you recognize this painting. And that had an estimated market value of over 130 US million, even though it was painted for less than 100 francs. And so also you see what the best brands, the top brands were in 2013. They're mainly technology companies, social media companies, and you see the retail companies like Walmart trailing the Apples and the Samsungs. But one of the things that Mr. King said in his presentation that I want you to, that sort of touched me, and I want you to think about it as we go along, is the fact that you touch technology and technology touches you. And so even though we're looking at mainly copyright-based industries, this industry intersects with so many of the other IPs that you have to be cognizant of which IP is most relevant to your sector of activity. So this is the suite of forms of intellectual property protection, and why I wanted to put it on the slide is to indicate what is available in Jamaica, and the asterisk shows what is not yet available in Jamaica in terms of utility models, which the government might want to look at. Of course, we know why IPRs are so important, because it gives investors, of course, an asset and a degree of certainty with clear proprietary rights which are legally enforceable. So if you're not protected, an investor won't be interested necessarily unless they're going to be protecting it for you. And we already know the monetization tools which are to be used include licensing, assignments, etc. And so I wanted to focus a little bit on protection because IP protection is pivotal to monetization. As I said, an unprotected asset cannot be optimally monetized, and we know that a lot of our creative outputs in Jamaica are not necessarily, have not necessarily secured IPR's protection before coming to market or before trying to make money from their creativity. Just a few examples of Jamaican brands that have used the system effectively. Of course, you know your Blue Mountain Coffee, which is a protective designation of origin in the UK, and it's protected as certification marks in the US and Jamaica. You have Walker's Wood. Walker's Wood has a very strong IP portfolio because they export to many countries, and so they are registered in all of the EU countries, Switzerland, Australia, New Zealand. You also have, of course, our very own Usain Bolt. Just his silhouette alone is registered and pending registration in over 50 countries of the world. And he has a portfolio of almost a dozen marks just to enhance protection of his image because, in some countries, as in Jamaica, image rights are just developing and we don't have statutory recognition for image rights. So we have to fall back a lot on trademarks. You have Immunizer. I don't know if there are any men that are familiar with that, or ladies. For weight loss, I think it's weight loss, right? That is a patented invention in Jamaica. And this new water bottle that I don't know if you have noticed on the market, it's called Island's Gem. That's a trademark, but the actual bottle is a registered industrial design in Jamaica because it has a hexagonal shape, so it's a unique design. So the first question you would ask yourself is, what type of protection suits your creation or your idea? As I've said before, and as Mr. King says, just look at it, not just as copyright, but many other different elements could relate to your creation. So while many creative sectors are copyright dependent, other IPs, such as industrial designs, trademarks, trade secrets, and even patents, as EXIM Bank said, are relevant. Your creation may be protected by different forms. Not every idea is protectable, and so you have to seek legal advice on what is best for you. Copyright protection intersects with patents in the area of ICTs. Copyright in Jamaica protects software, whereas patents will cover some software-enabled applications, but it won't protect software by itself. Copyright and industrial designs often intersect in the fashion industry. Patents and industrial designs cohabit in the ICT industry. And trademarks, of course, cross-cut all the industries which rely on branding to differentiate their products. And just to illustrate the point, you have Apple and Samsung, which are protected through trademarks, but their products comprise several patented technologies and they're also protected designs. And I don't know if you can tell the difference between those two images, but as Chris Foreman said, and I quote, even Samsung's own lawyer couldn't tell the iPad and the Galaxy Tab apart at a distance of about 10 feet from the bench. And that was when during their various different patent wars and design wars. Question 2, how do you protect your creation? I'll run through this very quickly. Copyright protection is the easiest form of IP to obtain, and that's because you get it upon creation. Patent protection is the hardest form of IP to obtain, and that's because the patentability criteria are very high to meet. Trademarks is relatively easy, and industrial designs as well, upon registration. Trade secrets, of course, that is something that is relevant to the culinary industries, the perfume industries, and because Jamaicans have a lot of recipes that they want to keep secret, and that is the area of protection that would apply to them. I'm not going to go through that slide, just to say that one of the peculiarities of copyright is that you don't need to register. But I know that JIPA will speak more about the fact that Jamaica is moving to have a registration system shortly, and we have already a voluntary registration system that has been recording some of the copyright claims of Jamaican creators. Trademarks, nothing to tell you about that, because I know that the protection side will be elaborated on tomorrow. But just to mention that it's very important to conduct searches before you apply for registration of trademark, because if you're thinking of going global, it can't be that you're just looking at the Jamaican, the JIPO searches. You have to be looking elsewhere so that you will not have a product, because I've had a client who has had a well-developed trademark in Jamaica, and when they were about to market it to the UK, there was a conflicting mark there. So you have to look global. In terms of patent, of course, we have an 1857 Act. I repeat, we have an 1857 Act that says it all. Patent protection actually in Jamaica is now has the shortest duration, because you can only get the protection for 14 years. For industrial designs, you can get it for 15 years. For copyright, it's 50 years, and they're looking to see if they can extend that. And for trademarks, you can perpetually renew every 10-year period. Once you have a mark that is being used, you should be able to get almost indefinite protection. Based on the antiquity of the Jamaican Patent Act, the inventor technically only has to concern himself about what is new to Jamaica. But of course, if you're thinking commercially, you have to look to see whether your invention is anticipated by the state of the art globally. And so you can conduct your own research beforehand, and Google is not enough. You have to make use of patent searches that are available even publicly on their databases. I said about the Designs Act already, and the important thing to know about registered industrial designs is that they're only protecting the aesthetic aspect of the product. They are not protecting functional designs. I think in the US they have a design patent that actually goes into functionality, but ours is just about the aesthetics, and when you get the registration, you have to have that little C on your products, or your little R, so R in the circle on the products. More and more Jamaicans are using the IP system to obtain intellectual property rights, which is very encouraging. The question is, how many are moving to commercialize and monetize their IP? In 2013, you're blocking me, cameraman. 90% of the applicants for industrial designs were Jamaican-based. Isn't that fantastic? In the past 3 years, over 20% of patent applicants have been Jamaican-based. Only a handful of them have been commercialized. We spoke about Canasol, and but that is not so far from international statistics, because I think just 5 to 7 patents that are granted are actually commercialized successfully. Just a slide there to show the statistics with the industrial designs and the trends. And the trends show that the use of the system has increased overall. So from 2002, you only had 6 industrial designs registered, whereas in 2013, you have had 124, and we're at 90% of that. For patent, we have a sizable chunk, even though it's just around 20%. You see Jamaica there in that flag. And so Jamaican patents there were 22 of them in 2013, and the US 31, and Germany 35. So if we are trailing the US, so, you know that Jamaican inventors are really, really looking at the patent system as something that can help them monetize. As I say, I still lament the fact that Jamaica has no patent fund, the government or the private sector, to actually look at these patents and see which ones they would want to invest in. And that's the comparison. You can have a closer look at that over the period from 1999 to 2013. And if you actually look at the scope of the patents that have been granted to Jamaicans, you'll see that it's not just the traditional scientific area that you would think. It also touches on ICTs, footwear, cosmetics, cricket, horse racing, furniture. So you're looking at some of the creative industries also getting patents. There's also an increased number of Jamaicans seeking registered trademarks. In October 2013, 45% of the applicants that we saw published in the Jamaica Gazette, not the Jamaica Gazette, no, the Trademarks Journal, which is published in-house by JIPO. 45% of them were from Jamaicans. And the trend is continuing. Also, there's been a growing increase for copyright, even though we don't have a registration system. We have a few statistics from the IP Center that does some voluntary registration, and you'll note that in 2012, 85 works were registered, whereas in 2011, there were only 69 works, and we have very eminent creators that use the IPC. We see also an increase in copyright owners joining collecting societies, such as Jam Copy. They added 63 creator members in 2013, so they have a creator membership totaling 377. So it shows that there's more diligence on the part of copyright stakeholders to secure their IP rights. The third and final question is, how do you monetize your IP assets? And thankfully, we have the experts here to tell you just how to do it. Secure ownership, and they have done so ably. Proper IP management, strategic exploitation. I think that was how Chris's presentation concluded. So identify what assets you own, get an IP audit done. The audit will show you what you own, what you don't own, what you thought you owned, and what you thought you owned, and what to do about it. Develop an IP management and commercial strategy, because the protection side and the commercial side go hand in hand. You must have a commercial outlook when you're formulating your protection strategies. You have to have a vision from the end, from the beginning. And the protection side requires the input of your legal advisors, your patent and trademark attorneys. Don't rush, for example, to file a patent without exploring the commercial issues. I think when you see so many dead patents on our register, you'll know what we're talking about. Don't rush to market without considering all the ramifications, including protection and infringement. The branding side is a major element. What to name your product, that requires advice as well. You know, some of these in the entertainment industry, there is a temptation to go with very savvy names. Some of those names might actually be unregisterable because they might be considered to be contrary to morality. I'm sure Mr. Goff has been counseling clients about that. The commercial side, of course, requires the input of your financial and commercial advisors and industry experts. From hearing these presentations, you will realize that it's a technical area, and you really have to sit down with these advisors to go through what is necessary in terms of monetization. It's important to seek commercial partners, as somebody correctly pointed out. Usain couldn't have done it on his own because he has a commercial partner in his sponsor Puma, that they have successfully marketed and merchandised his products with his trademarks all over the world. So you need to have a commercial partner. And the lone creator can't carry it forward. And we even saw that with Canasol, where they didn't get the international or the partnerships that they needed to just take it forward. The commercial side will advise you when to go to market, etc., how to structure your deals, where to market. They will tell you about the value of your IP, because potential investors, buyers, or licensees need to have a clear sense of the potential value of the asset in order to generate income and make a profit. The valuation exercise is complex, and all I'll say is that, in short, when it comes to valuation, the message is, don't try this at home. It says, left on his own, the tendency is for an inventor to overvalue. Making money in Excel, that's what it's called. Leave it to the experts. Commercial advisors can assist right holders in choosing the best options. Just to end with 2 success stories, just to focus on the immunizer. I don't know what their sales reports are, but I do know that they have been very present in marketing. I see the ads all the time, so I suspect they're doing well. And that patent was granted in 2006 to an individual inventor called Dr. Robinson, and the products are distributed through the company called Immune Venture Products Limited. So it's very important to work through a corporation. Finally, I like to tell this little quick story in 2 quick slides. It's a US success story. I like it because of the simplicity of the invention. I don't know if you know about the finder's key purse. Anybody knows about that? It's a gadget that you use to find your keys in your purse. And this story goes that Sandy, she had a dream in which she was told, bend back a hook, put a cute design on it, attach a claw hammer to hold your keys, and then you will have a way to make some money. With the help of a team of 20 friends, legal research and training in marketing, she created a prototype, used social marketing, and within 1 year had a team of 2,000 and sold 1 million pieces of the finder's key purse. She successfully enforced her patent against an infringer and admits that the patent was key to maintaining success on the market. Her company, Alex Inc., has sold over 8 million finder's key purses to 12,000 customers. Concluding, and this is the side note for policymakers, Jamaica has a good IPR's protection system to facilitate growth of its creative industries, but there are a few legislative gaps. We know there are copyright amendments pending, and it's very important that those come on stream very quickly. The existing Industrial Designs Act, 1937, needs to be revamped, and the approach to design protection needs to be rethought in light of new technologies. Protection is not matched to indigenous innovation because there's the absence of utility model protection, which would be more suited to the incremental innovation which takes place more routinely in Jamaica. I know that the government is also has that coming forward as well. And currently, the Patent Act is not aligned to global standards of protection and potentially limits the value of a Jamaican patent. Finally, for creators, it's possible for Jamaican creative industries to profit from their creative endeavors. Obtaining IPR's protection is the first step to building a valuable IP portfolio. Do an IP audit to assess what you own and what you need to protect. Manage your portfolio by employing proper acquisition, maintenance, and enforcement strategies with the help of your legal advisors. Maximize the value of your portfolio by adopting commercial strategies, including monetization, with the help of your financial advisors and commercial partners. Formulate a vision of the end from the beginning and strategically plan the path towards achieving it. With a careful thought out plan and the right team of advisors and partners, you can convert your IP into cash. Thank you.
What a wonderful, wonderful note to end on. Can you give all our presenters a round of applause? I know it was a lot of information, and as I said, we will make sure we can provide the presentations to you to go through. I'm going to allow for a couple of questions, but I myself have one question, given our time constraint, that I would like all 4 presenters to answer in the quickest possible time. The question is, given the desperate need to articulate a viable growth agenda for Jamaica, and given the stated economic development potential for the creative industries in Jamaica, What do you believe from your perspective is the single most important thing that Jamaica must and can do now to advance the monetizing of intellectual property? Excuse me.
Just for me, very quickly, create a toolkit or something of a resource that allows the small company, the small inventor, to talk in the same way to a bank that they can understand. So the bank and the SME that owns intellectual property and copyright can talk together on the same platform and in the same language, and that'll help an awful lot.
And I'll just take it a step further. Once that dialogue begins, then I think that we need to develop particular valuation methodologies for the respective types in the creative industries, and for the Bank of Jamaica to bind to those models so that when we deal with it to finance our clients, they will accept it and we can move forward. And so the bankers feel confident that the regulators are on board with us as well.
Have a conference targeting bankers and investors alone so that this information will be passed to them, because I think there's a disconnect. Creators are becoming more and more aware of their rights, and the frustration will grow if bankers and financiers remain out of the loop.
And so for me, it's just two factors I've considered. One, there needs to be improvement in the legislative framework that will enhance the industry, as well as there, in a couple of the creative industries, there are a lot of informal groups. I think they need to just come together, because this sector needs critical mass. And a lot of them, some transactions, it just can't afford it based on the size that you're looking at.
Thank you very much, Carol. I don't know if somebody's taking notes, but I think it's 4 key, very important points. And given that we have scarce resources, we need to prioritize. So I heard organization in the industry, you need to get together to solve some of the problems of data collection, etc. Focusing on the changing the legislation, legislative environment, as well as getting the bankers, the stakeholders in the room, policymakers and stakeholders in the room, and of course creating a toolkit to translate all that we heard today into something that our SME can understand. Question, go ahead.
Yes, hi, I'm speaking as a banker financier and someone who, full disclosure, I'm affiliated with EXIM Bank and aware of the investment that they made, and in a private capacity we've also invested in a creative effort in Jamaica, and it's been successful so far. And I think the message I want to give out to the creators, the way in which the investments were made was really because the creators had a relationship, a long-term relationship, and we understood their business. And we knew that they knew their business. And the question was asked, how many bankers are here? And I would want to say, as a creator, invite your banker along to these functions and have them really understand the creative business. I am a little creative myself, so I hang out with artists. There's one artist in Jamaica, a young artist, that I'm actually thinking would do very well as someone to market, because she has always approached her art as a business. She keeps records, she manages her presence globally. If you ask her anything about her art, she'll give you the creative side, and I was walking on the beach and this came to me, but she'll also give you the business. And she successfully managed to, some of those strategies that we have talked about, how do you use one thing to create multiple lines? She's done that. And she is actually ripe for investment. So it's a couple of things. One, you have to educate your banker. You have to educate them about your business. You have to have them understand that it's a business, it's not a hobby. And you also have to create for your own self an understanding that you're in a business. You are a not a banker, you're an artist, and that's how you're going to make your money. All right?
Thank you very much. Quick question.
No, not a question, just
All right,
one
quick comment. Sorry.
comment that you don't fall in the trap of your forefathers in reinventing the wheel. Know where your history is. Know your background, because what I'm hearing today, nothing is new under the sun. I teach information literacy at UTech, and I tell them I start my class with nothing is new under the sun. So there is always a history to anything. To yourself even, the first thing when you go to a doctor, they need your background to move forward before they can. So know the background to any industry.
All right, thank you.
It's an outgrowth. Everything develops.
Thank you.
Sorry, good afternoon, everyone. A few times throughout the presentation, the comment was made that Jamaica lacks the legislative framework to facilitate the monetization of intellectual property. But recently, the Secured Interest in Personal Property Act was passed, which essentially allows you to use your personal property, such as intellectual property, such as IPRs, to obtain financing. Now, I guess my question is, to what extent do you believe the SIP will increase or facilitate the monetization of IP? Is it that you think this was a waste of, the SIP was a waste of time? I mean, is the legal framework truly lacking in light of the fact that the SIP was recently passed?
Dan, you want to answer that?
Well, I'll just
take
make
it from the
two
financial.
quick comments. Foreign owners of trademarks have routinely registered their security interests under the Trademarks Act. So that is something that I think drew the comment that we want to sort of probably disaggregate IP from the SIP, because the SIP relates to all different types of personal property, whereas they want to see whether we can just zone in on IP. I don't know that the SIP in and of itself will assist without additional legislation in the banking sector. I don't know if Chris has anything to add.
I will just speak to, remember the bank, there is, every single commercial bank, every single financial entity operates under a specific act with a specific regulator. And that regulator guides what kind of collateral can be taken for different kinds of credits. The lack of let me think of this way. Banks don't want to take on IP as collateral, but because by accounting standards, in many cases, it's considered to be no or little collateral and will require them to provide if it goes bad, versus a hard asset which can where the value can easily be estimated. So not only do we have to change a legislative environment, we have to create a banking environment that facilitates the use of IP. So if you go into the average commercial bank and ask them, even if you get PriceWaterhouse to value it, and ask them if they're willing to accept it as collateral, they'll probably say no. So there has to be a deeper appreciation of the valuation methods and acceptance so that the financial sector can embrace it.
Excuse me, I see you shaking your head a little bit, but maybe the reason why I said an IP registry, I know that that act was passed and securities are there, but I just wanted to focus on intellectual property so that there is no gains in from a bank. But I'm not too sure, was it pledged to this bank, or how do I know? I just wanted a focus for us to really drive the process forward.
Go ahead.
How the SIP operates. For example, let's say you're using your trademarks as a mean.
Speaking to the mic, no one can hear you.
Secured Interest in Personal Property Act. Do you mind if I take this now? Sorry. All right. How the SIP operates. If, for example, you're using your trademarks as a means through which you are to obtain money from a bank, what you do, once you've created the contract, etc., you'll register it, one, at the Jamaica Intellectual Property Office. Well, if it is that it's under a license, but you do it, there's a SIP registry. That's the point. And that is housed at the Companies Office of Jamaica. Now, I understand that traditionally banks would fare using intellectual property assets as collateral, since it's not a traditional form. But the fact is, you have this new legislation which is geared towards increasing confidence in the commercial sector in that type of IP. So my point is that I don't believe it's fair for us to at this point say that our legislation is lacking. That's
No.
Okay, no.
I think Dan wasn't saying that the legislation is lacking. SIP,
SIP
we're
is
talking
not a
about
panacea.
regulation.
I didn't say that.
I think it's more about.
But I think it was important for her to bring out that point. But SIP is not a panacea.
Exactly.
It's still going to come down to what will I, as a licensee, accept as a value.
The regulators. I mean, you're mentioning.
So there are still gaps, but we acknowledge that there has been a huge step towards it.
All right. One more question.
There is a principle called parody that seems to be creating a tailspin in terms of protecting your IP, your intellectual property. It came to my attention in recent times with this company that opened a coffee retailer called Dumb Starbucks. And it seems as if Starbucks, who basically built up their own intellectual property over the past how many hundred of years or whatever, they can't touch them because of this principle of parody. How do we protect ourselves against that?
Dan, that's a you question, definitely.
Well, every property right has limits, and intellectual property does have limits, and it's limited by exceptions to infringement. So there are going to be always things you can do in fair commercial dealing that will not infringe or will not give rise to the right holder being able to take you to court for it. So there will always be exceptions. There's fair use, there's fair dealing, there's use of somebody for their personal name. If somebody decides, and I'm sure there might be many Usain Bolts out there that have been born since 2008, if a Usain Bolt comes up now, that person might have, under the trademarks exceptions, a right to use his own name. So let's not think that there are no limits on property.
Okay, I think that was, at first you started with legalese, but I think when you said the Usain Bolt example, is that clear to everybody, what this concept of parody is? All right, any other questions before we wrap up? Great. All right, so let me once again thank our panel. I think it was a very interesting panel and certainly very stimulating. I thank you for staying because we are beyond our designated time. I think Carol had said she wanted to do a wrap-up, so let me just hand over to her.
Thank you, Lisa. I just want to close off the session by thanking everyone, thanking all our presenters, our chairpersons, and to all of you who have been really very patient. I do see how tired you are, like myself. It has been a long day, and this is only 2 sessions that we had today. But of course, very interesting sessions. I do agree that perhaps we will have to have a special session with the bankers on this subject matter, and also with the creators. So please keep watching this page. To say that in closing off, that we will end our day with a reception hosted by WIPO, and I invite you to join Dimitar Ganchev and and Maniscaran Amasi from WIPO in the Neil and Massey room, which is at the very end of this corridor, for a reception. Which should be like right now. Thank you. Have a good evening.
And that's it. Day 1 of the Regional Conference on Intellectual Property. You would have heard many presenters say IP. So it's intellectual property, or IP, and the creative industries. The first of its kind being held in the region and being hosted by Jamaica. 14 countries being represented here today. And of course, we have the opening ceremony this morning. The keynote speaker making several suggestions, and certainly PBCJ was pleased to have brought you live coverage of this event. So day one, we looked at the issue of monetizing intellectual property and the creative industries as a factor for economic growth. Very important when we look and recognize the fact that the creative industries, certainly as an industry, can reap much in terms of economic benefits for the country. So from the University of the West Indies Mona campus on day one of the conference here, it's been my pleasure bringing it to you. We have on the walls right in front of me pictures of the greats of the university, Professor Rex Nettleford, Sir Alistair MacIntyre, and several others, certainly, and too on a day when we witnessed the passing of one of the greats, one of the intellectual greats from Jamaica, but certainly practicing his craft, his intellectual craft overseas in the UK, Professor Stuart Hall. He passed, of course, earlier on today, and certainly our condolences to the academic community and certainly to his family as well. So tomorrow we focus now on the legal framework and certainly the opportunities for intellectual property and the creative industries. It's been my pleasure bringing it to you, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Naomi Francis on behalf of the entire hard-working team from PBC Jamaica. Pleasant viewing.